Have you ever found yourself saying at the end of the day, there just wasn't enough hours in the day to get what I needed to get done? We find ourselves maybe saying that. We find that we have a million things that we need to be getting done. But what we find is that at the end of the day, we just haven't been able to accomplish all of those things. So when we begin to look at that, and if we really were honest with ourselves and we sat down and began to look at the day, we say, well, I probably could have gotten a lot more accomplished if it wasn't for all the distractions that happen throughout the day. So distractions are nothing that is uncommon for many of us. We find ourselves dealing with those distractions every day. And I don't have mine in my pocket. Mine's on the pew because we're recording. But many of us, the device that is in your pocket or in your purse is the greatest distraction that we face from day to day. So let's begin and look at this and look at the idea of the dangers with the distractions that we face from day to day. So it's interesting as I was getting this lesson together and you think about it, and again, really to be honest, I was very distracted when I was trying to get all this stuff done, but it says that we lose about 2.5 to 3 hours a day. Now think about that, in a day, due to distractions. Because what happens? We're busy doing something and then somebody comes in maybe at our work and they begin to talk to us about something else, or maybe the phone rings and we have to answer a call, or like myself, somebody texts you and you have to get that and then you have to get back on track. And what we find is the danger in this as well is that it will take you on average around 23 minutes to get back to where you were at in your doing your job or maybe through your activity, to get back on track from the distraction. So again, think of how important that is for the minimal amount of hours that we have, I guess. And we think, well, if it's going to take me 23 minutes just to get back to where I was, focused back on where I was at before I was interrupted, we see now why it's such a danger of having ourselves in that situation. Now, we can talk about the danger of that in work-related instances, right? People working at home or working in the office and someone walking in and asking you a question and you having to stop and to go answer that and get back on track. But not only in the world like that in the sense, but also in our Christianity. What about the dangers that we face as Christians? Now, one may ask then, if a distraction is such a big problem, and if a distraction is such a big danger, well, what would the opposite be of a distraction? Now, Brittany and I were talking about this, and I was looking at this up, and I said, well, what do you think? And she mentioned like focus and things like that. Maybe that's where your mind's going today. But really, the opposite of distraction is traction. So when you look at the English language of that and that dis kind of nullifying that traction, we say, yeah, that's the suffix that's added to that. So we say the opposite of distraction is traction. Now make sure we get this. And this is where we're kind of getting to with this lesson. Traction gets us to what we really want, and distractions keep us from what we really want. So in my life, if I say, all right, my goal is to achieve something, then if I'm distracted by that, then that keeps me from doing those things that I really want to do, right? We have a project that is due that day, or maybe we have something that we must simply get done that day at home, and we say, I can't have any distractions, right? I need to get this done. So the distraction actually pulls us away from those things and causes us to lose focus of what we really want. So in view of that, if you're here this morning, and I'm sure everybody that can understand the question that I'm asking, if we were to say, what is your main goal in life, right? What do you really want to do? We say, well, I want to go to heaven. So what we're looking at then is if that is my focal point, if the final destination that I really want to get to heaven, that's the ultimate goal in my life, is to get to heaven, then I must be careful with distractions because I need traction then in my life. I want to make sure that I'm gaining that traction and pointing myself toward that goal. So let's look this morning for the few moments that we have, and let's go to Luke chapter 10 and looking there and beginning in verse 38. Luke chapter 10. Appreciate Carson reading that for us this morning. That's the context we're going to get at, and we're going to actually look at someone who was distracted there when Jesus came to their house. So the idea of distractions. Luke chapter 10. Beginning there in verse 38, we find now it came to pass that as they went and they entered into a certain village, a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about with much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she helps me. So what we find here is Jesus has came into Martha's house. So again, through the text, she's the older sister. It's her house, it's mentioned. So she is the host. So she is busy trying to get certain things done. And that's a lesson all in itself if we were to say, what would you do? What would you be busy doing in your house if Christ came to your house, right? What would you be trying to clean up and do if Jesus were to come to your house? But nonetheless, we find the King James rendering that word cumbered. Now, that if you have a New King James or an ESV, I know those translations for sure will call that a distraction. She was distracted with many things, with much serving. So that word, that Greek word there really does mean to be distracted. And it's actually pulled from two words, or it has put two words to get that Greek word, one meaning to be drawn. So we can see that in the language there, that if a distraction, it draws me. And the idea of being pulled away from a reference point. So we're here today and we think, yes, I can understand the distraction then. It's pulling me away from that reference point. So again, if I'm here this morning and I'm honest with myself and I say, I really want to go to heaven, right? That's my goal. Where are we getting pulled away, right? The distractions are pulling us away, and we're being drawn from what we want to do. Now let's notice 3 points, and what we're going to look at here is the 3 points of this lesson, and then if you have the bulletin, you'll notice some tips to how we can stay focused, so we're going to get to that, and that's going to be our lesson this morning. But notice with me in verse 41. So we find there that Martha was cumbered about. She's busy doing all of these things. And what we find in verse 41, and Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. So what we find today is he's saying there you're careful or worried. That's the mental anxiety that she was having, right? Jesus is in my house. I'm trying to serve all these people. She has this mental anxiety. And then the trouble, she's troubled about the outward agitation. So we can understand that, right? With the holidays around us, trying to be busy doing all of those things. He says you're careful and troubled about many things. Friends, we must make sure that we're not distracted by many things today. So notice this. Let's look at the dangers, again, in the being distracted with the sense that I say if I'm too busy to study my Bible, right? And we say, Ben, there's just not enough hours in the day. You don't understand what all I have to do, right? We all say that. You just don't understand the hours things that I have to get done day to day. I just don't have enough time. I just don't have enough time to sit down and study. But what we find is the danger in that distraction that if we just say, I've got all this other stuff going on, I can't study, what we'll find is we're commanded, 2 Timothy 2:15, that we are to study, that we're to make sure we're handling the Word of God correctly. But notice in 2 Timothy 4, 3 through 4, that those individuals were turned away from the truth and they went after fables. If we're not careful, what we can find is we say, I don't have enough time to study my Bible. I just listen to the preacher on Sunday, right? I trust him. He's a good guy. I like him. I've known him for a long time. I can't find any verses. He doesn't really give a lot of verses when he preaches, but he's a good guy, and I'll believe him. And friends, that seems like, well, surely nobody would do that. But we know people personally that have that same attitude, do we not? That they say, well, I can't really find you anything in the Bible. My preacher doesn't really use a lot of Bible. He'll give a verse at the beginning and then that's about it. We don't take the time to study. Why? Because we're distracted. We say there's just not enough time. I don't have time to do these things. Now notice as well, what if we're distracted to the point that we're too busy to talk to somebody about the Bible or to talk to somebody about Jesus? Even we're so distracted, we can't even use our talents for Him. So look with me in Matthew chapter 25. This is worth a look. When we look at this and we're understanding the idea of the parable of the talents, again, the talents not being the physical talents, but that's how we kind of put them in principle to us today. But the man had certain amounts of money that was given him. But what we find is that everybody had a talent, right? Everybody was given something. So all of us in this assembly this morning, we say, well, we've all been given a talent, right? Not the money, like in the parable, but a physical talent. There is something that we all can do and we all can contribute to the church and the growth of the church. But notice when we look there, in verse 24, that he had received one talent, right? The one talent man, he comes and he talks about how he's afraid, right? We hear that often, don't we? Oh, I can't teach a class, Ben, right? I don't have time to study. I don't have time to prepare. My life's just too busy. I can't teach, right? I'm afraid to teach. I noticed, again, his idea here, he's saying, I'm afraid, and I was afraid of the kind of man that you were. But we notice there, as we continue reading, that he says, notice in verse 30, he says, and cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let that sink in for just a moment. If I'm here today and I say, I'm so busy that I can't serve the Lord in any capacity, the one talent man didn't say, well, look, you're just going to get into heaven, barely get into heaven. He says, cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping, gnashing of teeth. Friends, those people that don't use their talents will be lost. And what a surprise on the day of judgment when we say, well, I was just so busy, Lord. I was just so busy, I didn't have time to do that. You can see the danger that we face in the distractions, right? We don't really mean anything by it. It's just, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. Let's think about this. What if I'm so distracted that I can't worship God like I should? I love that verse in Malachi chapter 1 and verse 8 when it's prophesying about, he said, if you took those sacrifices and you gave them to your governor, would he be pleased? So the principle we say, right, you've heard it from the pulpit before, if we treated our job like we do worship, how many of us would still be employed? Right? If we came in when we come in to the worship service, if we give it the effort that we give worshiping God, would we still have a job? Many of us would say, well, no, I don't know that I'd still be employed there or not. So we think, all right, what am I giving to God? Colossians 2, verse 23, talking about the idea of will worship. The idea that I'm doing it for me, right? I'm here for me. I'm not here to worship God. I'm here to make sure that I am satisfied, that I am pleased, and that I am getting what I need out of it. What about the distraction? What if we're so distracted by those things that we say, I don't have time to get to service. Ben, you're lucky you get me here for an hour on Sunday morning, right? It's all I can do to get out of bed and get here. And what we find is the church around the world, right? The church, it's everywhere, right? People saying, I just don't have time. I don't have time to go worship God. I don't have time to get there. You don't understand. I'm busy, right? I'm a busy person. We get distracted. Again, and those distractions are, again, they're taking us away from what we really want. We say, I really want to go to heaven. Everybody in here would say that. They say, I want to go to heaven. But the distractions are pulling us away. They're pulling us away from studying the Bible and understanding more about where it's pulling us away and saying, well, I don't have time to worship, right? It's pulling me away from using my talents for God. And if we're not careful, friends, what we find is just like our regular week, right? I got all this I got to get done, and it's Monday. Well, what happens? Friday, I still don't have it done, and the week is gone. Before we know it, our life is gone, and here we are saying, I just didn't have the time. Now, notice if we go back to our text there in Luke chapter 10. All right, I just don't have the time. There's not enough hours in the day. You got Christ telling Martha, he says, you are careful and troubled about many things. Notice in verse 42, but one thing is needful. All right, what's the one thing that's important? Again, we talk about that. If we really sat down and said, all right, I'm going to be an adult here. I'm going to really evaluate these things. What's really important? It's to get to heaven, get my family to heaven. That's really important. If we really shuffled through everything that's going on in our life, that would be the most important thing, or it should be. I would assume it would be. You're here on Sunday morning. So we say, all right, we'll go to Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. All these things will be added unto you. When we add that all these things added unto you, we have to realize in the context of that, that's all the material things that we strive for each day. So there's one thing that's needful. There's one thing that we must be actively trying to do. And if we wake up in the morning and say, all right, my goal is heaven, right? So we can apply this to the secular world and say, my goal is to get this done, right? We have that focus when we wake up that morning. This is what I must achieve. So if we wake up in the morning and say, all right, heaven is the goal. That's where I'm headed to go. What do I need to do in order to do that? But notice, we can't break that traction. Now, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 24 through 27, talking about how Paul would discuss the idea that some people race for an incorruptible or for a corruptible crown, right? We understand Paul using that reference of the marathons and the races that would be happening in that time. He says they're running that race for a corruptible crown, but we are running for an incorruptible crown. Right? We've said it before, the Christian life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we have to be steady about going, all right? Keeping that in mind, keeping that focus in our lives where we're saying, all right, this is what I'm headed towards, this is what I'm running toward, right? And Paul talking about bringing his body under subjection, right? He says, all right, I know what the goal is, I know heaven's the goal, so I've got to get, right? I've got to man up and I've got to do this and I've got to live my life that way. Revelation 2:10, where John would write about the idea of Christ saying that we are to be faithful unto death, and I'll give you the crown of life. That crown is that victory crown, but not the kind of crown like we would get today if we ran a race, right? The victory crown, heaven, that goal that we're trying to achieve. If we say, all right, I don't want to get distracted, I don't want to break traction, I want to have traction and say, heaven's the goal, I can't lose sight of that. What am I actively doing day to day to make sure that I'm getting that way? Now notice as again, when we go back to Luke chapter 10 here, here's point number 3. Luke chapter 10. He says to her there, but one thing is needful. All right, there's one thing needful, Martha. Mary's doing that thing. Notice, Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. That good part, right? We must choose that good part. What we find here, again, they're not going to be taken away. What Mary was doing was she was sitting at Jesus' feet, and she was there for the most important thing. And again, in the context of what's going on here, Jesus has set himself to Jerusalem. He set his face to go to Jerusalem. So he's on his way, and we understand when he got to Jerusalem, he would be crucified. He said he's on his way, he's about to leave. And Mary says, I've got to listen to Jesus. I've got to listen to what he has to say, right? Jesus is in my house. Many of us would look at that and say, well, Jesus is in my house. I've got to clean. I've got to straighten up. I've got to make sure that nobody drops in that I don't want to have expected there, right? I'm afraid some people might show up. But some of us may just say the opportunity to have Jesus in our house, right? Jesus is here. I got to listen to him. I've got questions to ask him. We understand what Mary did, the most important thing. So what we find then is the distractions, they keep us from the most important thing. And the things that we're looking after, right? Those things that we think are the most important, Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 21, those are the things that are going to perish. When we talk about laying up treasures on this earth, he says, don't do that, right? Where moth and rust doth corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Right? So we don't have to worry about rust or moths or thieves breaking through and stealing those treasures that are in heaven. Because the things that we're distracted by are going to be to somebody else. Stick around for the next half hour. We'll talk about that idea with the parable of the rich fool. He tears down his barns to build a bigger barn. And what happens? He dies. He says, who gets it now? Everybody else. Right? Everything that I'm striving to get, I'm hoarding those things back. Those things that I'm distracted by that ultimately may keep me from heaven are just going to be for somebody else, right? They don't mean anything after I die. Now, notice this. Again, we always want to keep looking towards that goal. 1 Corinthians 15:58, we strive always to do it because our work for the Lord is not in vain. That if we talked about this in class, that's good time management, right? Any time that I can study the Bible, it's not a bad time to study the Bible. Any time that I can go visit someone, that's not a bad time. That's not a bad use of my time. Any time that I can come to services, any time that I can come to an event that the church is hosting, any time that I can be busy being a Christian is not time wasted. You never hear anybody, right? It's cliche, but we've heard that. Nobody's on their deathbed talking about how they wish they could work more hours. They wish that they could have been away from their family more. What do they say? I wish I could have been around my family more. I wished I could have done more for the Lord. Whatever the case may be, right? We understand those are the things that are most important, and that's good investment of time. Now, with the time that we have left, I've tried to do a little better because sometimes I feel like I paint you into a corner and think, oh man, this is bad, right? But I don't really give you an avenue of how to get out of that corner. So I'm trying to do a little better with that with my sermons. So here's the good news. If you find yourself, and it's like, I am distracted, I'm suffering through distractions, and if I find myself being led away from what I really want, how do I get better at this? I'm going to try to help you here. If, again, in the bulletin you have an 18 list thing there. This is a secular idea, but what we're going to do is look at this through a spiritual lens, if you will. So I'm going to go quickly, so we didn't have time to write all of them down, so I've got those for you. You're welcome to take a picture of the screen if you don't have the picture, or you can get it to me after. But here we go. These are 18 habits. So if you're like me and distractions happen and they get you, and it was funny because Brittany and I, when we were talking about this the other night, we were sitting there, she said, did you receive this book in the mail? I said, I haven't yet. I've gotten one, but I don't have the other. So she said, I got to go try to find it. And she said, that's just like what you're talking about. I was busy working on something, and I've got to go do this. So we're going to talk about that. How do I get away from these distractions? How do I keep myself focused on heaven? So again, number one here, notice, is the focus on the most important task. So Philippians chapter 3 and verse 14, talking about the idea of pressing on toward the mark. That if we wake up every morning and our decision is, I'm trying to get to heaven, and I'm going to try my best all day to make sure that the decisions that I make are getting me there. We can't lose focus. Now, this is going to really come in handy in a moment, because, again, there's only 24 hours in a day, so we're going to have to shave a little of that fat off, and we're going to have to say, all right, we got to get rid of some things. We can't do everything, so we have to focus on the most important part or the most important task. And again, if that is, honestly, if you're in here today and you say, yes, Ben, honestly, I want to go to heaven, I'm trying to do my best to go to heaven, that needs to be what we focus on. Now, point number two, we cultivate the deep work. Now, what that means is, again, now this is looking at a secular way, is it's almost like you need to shut everything else off and focus on something completely. Now, we can't have this going on and this going on. What we need to do when we talk about, and I referenced Psalm 1 and 2, because the man of God, the righteous man, his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in it doth he meditate day and night, there in verse 2. So the idea there is I'm meditating on the Bible. Now, if you want to be a better Bible student, take 30 minutes out of your day and say, turn your phone off or put it on silent, turn the TV off, shut yourself in a room, whatever you got to do, and 30 minutes undistracted, I'm focusing on God's Word. And you'll be surprised what you're able to pull out of the text because you don't have everything else going on around you. You can't sit on your couch and watch TV and have the kids playing in the living room and read the Bible and get the same amount of stuff out of it. You just can't do that. So what we find is that deep work, right? Set aside some time and say, I want to be a better Bible student. Or set aside some time and say, I'm going to go visit with someone. I know somebody in the community, they really need visiting. Somebody of our membership here that can't come out. I'm setting that time aside, right? I don't have anything else planned. 30 minutes, I'm going to go visit this person. I'm going to leave, right? No distractions. So that's what we're looking at. This can help us to be more effective in reaching our goal of heaven. All right? The point number 3 is what I told Brittany she should have done, is to keep the distraction list. If you find yourself in your room there and you're reading the Bible and something comes into your head, they advise you to take a piece of paper and write that down. Right? Don't go do that and then try to come back. Write it down. And say, all right, when I get done with this, when I get done with studying the Bible, I'm going to do that. If you're visiting with someone and you think about something you got to get at the store, write it down, put it back in your pocket, stay focused on the visit. You understand? What we're trying to do is, because in the beginning we talked about the 23 minutes that it takes me to get back on track. If I'm only devoting 30 minutes to the Bible, and I say, all right, that's how I'm going to start, and I get distracted and I come back, I've really lost my time there. So keep that distraction list ready. Now, Brother Danny asked me about this Eisenhower matrix. Again, this goes back to Matthew 6:33, keeping the most important thing the most important thing. So here's this diagram. And I'll try to give it up here for just a minute. But you can understand, or we can see, that the most important and the most urgent you do it first. So if we were to say, all right, the most important and the most urgent is making sure that I'm doing my work for God, we do it first. If it's not that urgent, you schedule it a little bit later. If it's not really that important, but you really got to do it right then, we may have to delegate that work to someone. And again, the idea of not important, not urgent, delete it. Now, I say this to say, if there's only 24 hours in a day, and I say, all right, my main focus is to get to heaven, my main focus is to be a better Christian, I may have to delete some things. I may have to say, you know what, I just don't have time. It's really not that important to watch that particular show in the evening, right? Of course, now we can stream it wherever we want to. It's not like it used to be, right? When you had to be there at that time if you wanted to watch that. But we say, all right, I really enjoy that, and there's nothing wrong. We're going to look at this. There's nothing wrong with doing these activities. Nothing wrong with watching a television show, a movie, going to a ball game, watching ball games. There's nothing wrong with those things, but we have to make sure we're not saying, I'll do this most important thing, right? The most important thing is to study or grow. I'll do it later. We don't want to put it in the scheduling it later or delegating it later or deleting it later pile. We want to make sure we're doing it first. Now, let's look at point number 5, the 80-20 rule. This was important. Sometimes we get kind of overwhelmed with the amount of things that we have to do, and we kind of get our eyes are a little bigger than our stomach, and we say, oh, I'm going to do all of this. But really, if we'll focus just on 20%, and what that rule is that if you'll do 20% of the task, it's really more like 80% of what you need to get done. That it really helps out if you'll do 20%. So instead of trying to take that whole big bite out of that apple, right, eat that elephant in one bite, we do it a little bit at a time. So say, all right, I'm going to do this little task, I'm going to get this most important thing done, and really that helps me through most of the other stuff. Now, the break tasks into smaller pieces. Now, this is really important because it might be that 2025 you say, I want to read through the Bible, and I've only got like 2 months to do it in now. That's a daunting task. You can do it, but that would be a daunting task to try to say, I'm going to try to read through the Bible all within that amount of time. I think you'd be far more successful if you were to say, all right, to be a better Bible student, let's just start with reading a chapter at a time. I've got a list in my office, if you're interested in that, where you can read the New Testament in a month. You read like 7 or 8 verses a day, and that gets you through the whole New Testament within 1 month. So we got to make sure we're putting these realistic style of goals, because what we find is we say, I'm going to read the Bible through in 2025, and we get into Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, right, Wednesday night class, and we say, I don't have time for this, right? I got so much more going on, I don't have time for that, and we get bogged down, and before you know it, we're not going to read through the Bible. So start small, right? Break those into smaller pieces and say, I want to read through the New Testament maybe first. All right, let's move on. Take breaks. Now, this doesn't mean take a break from doing the work of the Lord. It doesn't mean taking a break from church. What I think that means is we can still study the Bible. We can still participate in church activities, but there are available times where we can take a break. I think it's good to watch a ball game. I think it's good to go places on vacation. There's nothing wrong with taking breaks, refreshing the battery, recharging the batteries, but we don't want to make sure we're putting that first, but we can take those if we get everything accomplished that we need to. Continuing on, I couldn't think of one that would fit into a spiritual side, making fewer decisions. Maybe those things that aren't as important. I shouldn't devote hours of my day to something that's probably not that meaningful in my life. I should probably just can that and go on with something else. So make fewer decisions. All right? Eliminate inefficient communication. This is a hard one for me. I told Brittany I was going to put my steel-toe shoes on. Get rid of them phones, right? It's easy to get. It's so convenient. I got to check on somebody. I'll shoot them a text message. I'll check on them here, send them a message. But that dreaded Facebook, right? Get on Facebook, and before you know it, 30 minutes is gone. You're down here trying to talk to somebody. 30 minutes is gone, and you think, man, where's the time gone? But really, I've had the time. So try to eliminate those things. Try to say, all right, I'm going to try to spend less time on my devices. I'm going to try to spend less time doing other things. The repeatable shortcuts, again, I don't really know. There is a good study that goes around that if I want to be a better Bible student, or I guess you could apply it even with visiting people, if you'll put yourself on a routine doing that you know that on this morning, this time I'll study, or at this time, on this day I'll visit that person. That does help you. So I guess that would kind of be a shortcut. You don't have to plan that. It just kind of fits into your schedule. I like this one. Learn from successes and mistakes. So James chapter 1, 2 through 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations. So when the idea of there that I'm learning from that and I'm growing. So if I say, all right, I'm going to read the Bible today, but it doesn't work, right? Learn from those failures and say, all right, I got to do better. I'm going to learn from that. Plan for when things go wrong. I will give you that word of advice. If you tell yourself, I'm going to read a chapter a night after I eat supper, something's going to come up, right? The devil is so good at causing distractions. He'll be like, well, somebody's going to come over. I get a phone call from somebody. Well, I've waited till then. Now I can't do it. So plan for when things go wrong. Don't work before you are motivated or inspired. That's a big one. Make yourself diligent to say, I'm just going to read a chapter a day, right? Don't wait for the motivation. Don't wait to be inspired to do that. Just say, all right, I'm a grown-up. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to read it a chapter a day and just do it. Don't multitask. Again, set that time away. If I'm going to go visit someone, don't try to say, well, I'm going to do this while I'm out doing this other. Just say, all right, today, after school, I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to do. So don't multitask. Fill the tank. Again, the idea of recharging. Now, I put this in Hebrews 10:25. Not that I need to take a break from the church, but like our last Sunday night when we came out and did our chili supper, what a great time that was. If you weren't able to be here, I'm sorry you missed that. What a great time it was to be able to be around Christians. But it wasn't a biblical setting in the sense. We were just around other Christians. We were just having a good evening. So that recharges you, right? That fills the tank. Keep your act sharp. Now, I put in here reading. You may say, I don't have time to read a book, Ben. I can't focus that much time. But articles, we've got the Reasons and Revelation out in the foyer. You can get those little short articles. Podcast, if you're on your way to work. Listen to a podcast, GBN, the Gospel Broadcasting Network. They've got an app. You can pull up anything. It's great. So I say, all right, on my way home from work, I'm going to listen to a podcast. Or my way into work, I listen to a podcast. On the way home, I listen to the radio. Any which way you want to do it. But stay sharp on those things. Read up. Manage your energy. This is so important. Please, if you don't take anything else from this lesson, please don't wait till before you go to bed to read the Bible, to read your Bible. Don't say, all right, I've got all this other stuff going on, and at the end of the day, no, it's better really if you'll wake up in the morning and read your Bible first. Or again, don't wait till you've got all your checklist done to do this, because what you'll find is you've ran out of time. You're exhausted at the end of the day, and you'll say, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll read 2 chapters tomorrow, right? We've all done that, and then before you know it, you just give up completely. So manage your energy. Make sure you're putting the first things first. All right, I want to go to heaven. Is reading my Bible and studying important for me to go to heaven? Absolutely. Let's do it first. All right, so get better at saying no. Now, that doesn't mean to anything. I put in there to the worldly things. We have to make time. If we say, Ben, there's only 24 hours, I can't do all of this, you're going to have to cut the fat off. You're going to have to say, this isn't really this important. This isn't going to help me get to heaven. I probably need to say no to this. Now, here we are in closing. Satan's most successful tool, I think he finds for many Christians to get us led away, is that he can lie, right? Then that goes across everything. John 8:44, he's the father of all lies. His best tool is to just lie to us. Now, he can lie to us and tell that we're doing plenty, right? Don't worry about being so active in the church. Don't worry about studying for yourself. Don't worry about visiting people. Other people will handle all that stuff for you. You're just so busy, and he'll lie to us. And before long, what we find is that whole year went by, and I'm not any stronger Christian than I was at the beginning of the year. And what we find, too, is he'll distract us so much. James chapter 4, verse 14, our life is like a vapor. It appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Well, before long, we say, well, I'll be a Christian one of these days. I'll get better one of these days. Let me get some of this stuff. And distraction after distraction after distraction. And before we know it, our life on this earth is gone. And we say, I just didn't have the time. So friends, don't let that be the case this morning. We must understand that we have the time and opportunity to be Christians today, right? Why put that off? If you're really focused on going to heaven today and you're not a child of God, I would venture to say that that's not number one priority in your life. If you're here today and you're lost and you say, well, I know I'm lost, I've read the Bible. heaven's probably not priority number one then, or you would do something about it. We have time and opportunity to do that today. We hear, believe, repent, confess, and we're baptized. We have forgiveness of our sin, remission of sin in the baptismal waters. Then we find that we must remain faithful. So if you're here and you're a Christian in name, and you say, well, I'm not really doing anything during the day to help myself get to heaven, I must question if heaven's really your goal. And you say, well, all right, I've got to do better. We confess that sin, we repent of that sin, we can be restored. But if you're here and you're struggling and you say, look, man, I do want to go to heaven and I struggle, I need the help and prayers of the church, we can assist you with that today as well. So if you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, won't you come forward now as we stand and as we sing.